Good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Tonye, also known as the Selfcare Maven, and welcome to my channel. And as promised, today I am going to be covering a topic that I previewed earlier. And excuse me, I've got something going on here. Had another device going. Sorry about that. But anywho, I alluded to this in my earlier live stream where I was talking about three archetypes of Black women that are deadly. And today's episode here, after that preview, I am actually going to dive into it. So, welcome to the channel. Drop an emoji, say hi, and welcome again to my channel as I discuss this. My background is in healthcare. I've been in healthcare for over 15 years. On the laboratory side, I have been a women's self-care and health coach for Black women since 2015. And I help Black women liberate themselves through self-care that is culturally relevant and decolonized, because the version of self-care that's out there, it's not for us. So having said that, again, today I want to dive in. I struggled with this topic a little bit because I know that it can be triggering for some of us, but the reality of it is this is something we cannot neglect. And so I just want to reiterate that again, this is necessary. In order to heal, sometimes you have to trigger through things in order to heal. And, this topic is something we need to address. The first part of the journey, the healing journey, the liberation journey, is self-awareness. And so when I speak to the notion of, these three types of Black women who are digging themselves into an early grave and breaking that cycle of that, awareness has to come first, right? And so if you are plodding along on that hamster wheel going nowhere, then guess what? You are going to continue to stay in that zone. And so, again, let's get it started. I've spoken on this in my previous live stream that was a preview to today's topic. If you didn't watch the last short live or the replay of the live I did prior to this, then by all means, make sure you go back and watch it. So again, this is a channel that is dedicated for Black women and Black women only. Others are welcome to view and, watch in and tune in and understand and learn. But by all means, know that this is a place and a space that Black women are centered. Now, as to the three types of Black women who are digging themselves into an early grave, I alluded to it again, but I did not give you those three topics and those three archetypes. And I didn't for a reason, because I don't want people to get caught up too much in the whole notion of archetypes and all of that. But it's important that you as a Black woman know which one you fit in. And once this live stream is over, give me about a day or two to upload some helpful resources. I will be uploading a PDF worksheet where you can see, you'll go through the whole entire worksheet, and then you'll be able to get an idea of what archetype you fit into and how you can get on your journey to liberation and self-care and being unbothered and undomesticated as a Black woman existing in America, existing globally. And so let's get into it now. Now that we've had that little, intro, let's head to the first one. The first one, ding, 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 is, I'm sure some of you, I know I once upon a time was one of these, and that is the Black woman with Sojourner syndrome. Yes, that's the caretaker, always sacrificing, putting herself last at the bottom of the list. And surprise, not a surprise, I'm going to preface this by saying all of these archetypes, and I've spoken on this before in other lives and other videos where I talked about maladaptive strategies for navigating the world that we live in here in the U.S. as a Black woman, as a Black person in a country and a world that's rooted in anti-Blackness, oppression, and exploitation. And so these are realities that we have to navigate. And we generationally came up with different strategies to survive, to move forward, to be hopeful, to carry and create our next generation with the hope that they would be in a better place than, than us. And so at this point now, we come to a space now, we come to a time in history where we see the realities of that whole notion of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The definition of crazy, yes, we've been doing that repeatedly over and over and over and over again. And not to get too far into what happened in November of last year, we were shown, I'm so glad that we had like a great awakening as a people, as a community, as a collective, that we get it now. And so this is no longer our fight. This is no longer something we need to continue to work on, because now it's time, we recognize that it's time to break the cycle. Hence the whole hashtag of, we're sitting this one out, we're resting and all of that. That's all very well and good. However, let's bring it back to the notion of Black women, that those archetypes, regardless of decisions that were made last year going forward, we still have these manifestations, these archetypes that we need to address in order to decouple from unhealthy ways of navigating life. Now, the sojourner, that was an archetype we put on. And lo and behold, yes, all of these archetypes are rooted in chattel slavery and oppression. And that might trigger some people, but the reality is our ancestors didn't have a whole lot of choices when they were forcibly removed and brutalized and killed, all kinds of atrocities committed against our ancestors in that transatlantic slave trade to the Americas. And as a result, they used what they had, the knowledge, what they had, the resources, what they had, to craft and create modalities for survival, essentially. And so the sojourner archetype is one of those archetypes. The problem is that that is not working anymore for us, for any of us. The sojourner archetype of self-sacrifice, caretaking, giving away, sacrificing, all to prove that, we can keep going, but at the expense of her own health and well-being. And we see the realities of this from a health perspective. We see this show up in what we see in terms of the health outcomes of Black women who go through the healthcare system. Now, I don't know how many of you or follow this young doctor resident. He's breaking a lot of ground. His name is Joel Burvell. He had a huge splash and really went viral on TikTok when he started talking about racism, medical racism, and what that looks like. And so this ties into that in terms of when you look at self-care for Black women. And when you look at our healthcare outcomes and what the results of embodying these, how damaging and how destructive and life-threatening continuing to embody these archetypes do to us as Black women. And so we have the sojourner syndrome, like I said, the caretaker always self-sacrificing, putting herself last. And what ends up happening, all those things in terms of monitoring your health, and that not just talking about your physical health, but your mental health. You keep pushing that till the end of your bottom of your list. And what ends up happening at the end of the day, your body gets to a point that it can't sustain that anymore. And so we see that come in through the hospital system. I see that on the laboratory end when I'm looking at results and seeing all these critical numbers, and then having discussions with colleagues about this, and then we talk about, how this plays out in a system that is already imbued and built on racism. I hate to break it to people who are living under a rock who don't know this, but our healthcare system, unfortunately, is conditioned by racism. There are too many stories, too much data out there coming out where Black women who've finally broken down health-wise end up in the emergency room and they're not taken seriously, or their symptoms are trivialized, or they're just not listened to point blank. And I've witnessed some of this from a personal experience, but I've also read the data and the anecdotal responses from Black women going in through the healthcare system. And this is regardless of your social economic status. The point I'm trying to make is these archetypes are deadly. And we've got to we've got to arrive at that. We've got to do the internal work. You can't do self-care if you don't start with the mental component first and start unpacking a lot of this ish that we carry inside. And I mentioned earlier before that living in a anti-Black and racist society, apartheid-like society, it does impact you. There is no way that you can exist in a bubble and be divorced from the impact, the internalized aspects of the environment that you live in. And so when it comes to self-care, if you're wondering why that self-care, that version of self-care that's popularized in mainstream media that wasn't built for us by us, you see the problem. You begin to see the disconnect. You wonder why it's inaccessible. You can't get it. It doesn't make sense to you. It doesn't resonate for you. And it's because that's a system. It's part of a system that is separate from us. And so, again, the sojourner, that whole sojourner archetype, I was her once upon a time. I was giving till I had nothing left. I was running on empty, running on fumes. Women in my family, same thing. And I want to clarify some things. It's not that you get stuck or rigid. You're rigid, it's a rigid construct where, you're just the sojourner type archetype. You can actually fall at different points in your life or in combination embody all three of these archetypes. The next one is the strong Black woman syndrome, or strong Black woman archetype. And many of us are more familiar with this more than any one of these other archetypes, because we have had to show up like this. Many of us, in order to exist, to thrive, to survive in American society, and, just existing in a space where we experience racial and gender-based discrimination at all of it, we hit all the intersections. We are unfortunately impacted by all of this. We're impacted by sexism. We're impacted by misogyny, patriarchy, racism, all of the isms, unfortunately. And so when you as a Black woman exist in that space, the levels and amount of pressure that we are consistently subjected to on a daily basis, it begins to wear and impact you in very critical ways. And one of those is in terms of our health and wellness. And that's why I am such an advocate for Black women's self-care and health care. And why I believe that we must first decolonize our mental selves, and we need to be practicing our version of self-care needs to be a decolonized version of self-care that is culturally relevant, culturally significant for us, that harkens back to our ancestral roots and natural and indigenous practices of healing, that heals the body, that heals the spirit, that ministers to that need for community and sense of family and connected to the earth. That is our version of self-care and healing. What's out there is very commercial, it's very exploitative, and it's very capitalistic, which is rooted again in all of these exploitative and oppressive systems. So, why are we surprised that that version of self-care doesn't work for us? So when I say this strong black woman, we're talking that archetype. We're talking about hyper independent, never complains, can often be seen as a lot of times people will say you're aggressive or that you're seem to be cold or calculated or just kind of very reserved. That's the strong black woman syndrome. And again, its origins are rooted in racism, misogyny, and, the pressure to be superhuman. And the consequences of that are when you see it in the play out in the healthcare arena, things like hypertension, mental health issues, loneliness. You see instances of depression as well. All of this being contained in, and suppressed under this strong black woman archetype. And that's why you can understand how this prolonged behavior, this prolonged survival strategy is not healthy in the long term. And we see the generational impacts of that. A lot of us had mothers, aunties, and whoever who were in the community, who were in our family lineage, who were the strong black women because they felt they had to be in order to put food on the table, in order to make sure that we were protected, in order to make sure that we thrived and had a future. This is a maladaptive strategy that we have been carrying, and it's so problematic and so it's generational that it's literally become a cycle of behavior, and it's something that reverberates now throughout all generations. And this is why it's important now, if you truly want to talk about self-care as a black woman, you want to heal, you want to move to the next level, you want to be liberated and decoupled from colonial thinking, anti-blackness, and rooted in true healing and a growth, you have to unpack this bullshit. You have to unpack it. There's no way around unpacking anti-blackness, unpacking patriarchy, unpacking all of these unhealthy and these destructive systems. Because again, if you live in a system, in an environment, there are no real closed, there are some closed systems biologically, but by and large, for the most part, there are very few closed systems. The way we exist as human beings anyway is not a closed system. So what does that mean? That means that you will be impacted by environment, whether that's your social environment, whether that's your cultural, whatever environment you want to look at, biological, mental, spiritual, whatever. You are conditioned by it. That's just the realities of being human. And so knowing that, having that awareness means that in order to move forward, in order to really self-care, thrive, and heal as a black woman, you've got to unpack that stuff. You've got to address it. It is, and in a lot of instances, it is triggering. I know for my own self-care journey, for a while, I was able to do on my own, but then I got to a point that I needed a professional mental health provider on my self-care team in order to facilitate real healing and real thriving, really decoupling and breaking out of those cycles. Means that in order to get off that altar of other people's expectations and live undomesticated, because I am truly, truly on this undomesticated black woman journey, I refuse to lay on the altar of anyone's expectations. I refuse to sacrifice myself or set myself on fire to keep other people warm and comfortable. That is done. That cycle ends with me. And if you want to live the life that you were destined to live, you want to live your whole full life, not just as a black woman, as a woman, but as a human being existing in this vast universe with all the gifts and capabilities that you carry within you, you're going to need to do that work. And so, one of those, if you fall into that archetype of the strong black woman, you know yourself. I'm surrounded by coworkers, especially black women in healthcare and the service industries. This seems to be a typical field for black women who fit that archetype. A lot of us have ended up in healthcare or any other service industry. A lot of them or end up being social workers, teachers, all of that giving, 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 giving. The next one I want to talk about is I know this one will probably trigger some folk, but it's the Sisterella archetype. And this is the overachiever who believes her worth is how much she does for others, waiting for validation or rescue. And this is rooted in respectability politics, reward-based love, and the pick-me culture. So this might trigger some folk. I know, and I will own the fact that at one point I was a pick-me because I had not worked through those issues. I had not decoupled my self-worth from how much of myself I'm able to give for looking for validation outside of others. And so when you think about this, arguably, I would say this is the saddest archetype to fall into because in a number of instances, black women who fit this archetype will find themselves in relationships that are very transactional, and they will find themselves in very toxic, all of them find themselves in toxic environments to some regard. But when it comes to interpersonal relationships, I want to arguably say that the Sisterella archetype ends up in the most dangerous and problematic toxic situations because she's looking for her worth outside of other people. She's hoping that she can earn her rest. And I know I touched on this in an earlier video or lives weeks ago. And even on the Undomesticated Woman podcast. That's my podcast. Follow the podcast as well. If this is resonating with you, by all means, hit the fire emoji, follow, and hit the notification button so that you hear when I go live again, because I'm really thinking that I might have a part 2 to this whole live today, because I know for, in the interest of time, and I know this is the holiday weekend, I didn't figure that out until until actually yesterday. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is Easter weekend for, most of us. And yeah, but that's a separate train of thought. But if you are a pick-me, if you are, dedicated to respectability politics, polite, you got to look a certain way, you've got to behave a certain way, you've got to code switch in the workplace, you've got to put on the professional demeanor, all of this, you've got to, you got to hustle, you got to, you've got to kill it in the workplace. That is the Sisterella syndrome, and that will end you quickly. That is one of the, like I said, I believe that's one of the most saddest archetypes of, the 3 archetypes of black women who are, putting themselves in an early grave because there's no reward. The reality is there is no reward for any of this. And I'm glad and I'm so thankful that the next generation of Black women are finally awakening to this fact that you cannot, one, give them a place of emptiness. You cannot sacrifice who you are. You deserve your existence is validation alone. Those who brutalized our people and brought us here never thought we would be here. Never thought we would be here. Never thought that we would rise in the face of adversity. They never did that. And so the onus on us now, and this is why I also speak to the fact when I talk about traveling abroad, things like moving abroad, understand, I'm not going to lie to any of you and say that self-care fixes everything. It doesn't. Part of the core of self-care is awareness, self-awareness, and unpacking and healing things that you've carried with you. Those burdens of other people. Look, the way other people feel or think about you is not your business. And it took me a long time to release that. And a lot of these when you start doing the internal work, this is why I said it's critical that you get a mental health provider to help you unpack a lot of this stuff, because some of it is going to be triggering. We have generational, that is a reality of the Black condition as a collective of people, is generational trauma inflicted by something that, by an occurrence in history that continues even to this day in different forms, that would have ultimately annihilated other groups of people. Our resilience, our strength, our adaptability is a testament to the strategies and the strength of our ancestors. But now it's time, to release those things that have become maladaptive. And these archetypes, personas, syndromes are terribly, terribly maladaptive. They are killing us as Black women. We need to decouple and release that. And in some instances, that's going to call for an environmental shift. Some Black women are choosing to move abroad because they recognize that for them, whatever that may be, they have identified, made the choice and decision and the calculation that trying to continue their own personal healing and self-care in its entirety means that they actually need to shift their geographical location. Now, is it something that's practical or available to every Black woman, to every person, or is it even a decision that every Black woman is going to make? No. Everyone has to understand that the self-care and our version of decolonized self-care is a personal and internal, very personal internal journey, but it also incorporates aspects of collective community too. And that is something that is unique to us as people, as women, community. There is a level and power in community healing. This is something that most indigenous groups, Black and brown groups, have recognized historically, way back, the importance of community when it comes to healing and when it comes to thriving. For one thing, strictly sticking on the biological aspects, mammals, animals, whatever you want to call it, every living thing has some notion of community, and that looks different. But at its core, we humans are very social and communal beings. Living in a capitalistic, exploitative, racist society, has artificially separated us from that. And when you separate a plant from its root, what happens? Eventually, it will, we've seen vines do this, where you make cuttings and things of that nature, or you have a tree branch and cuttings and whatnots. And for a while, things adapt and whatnot. But if they are not connected in some way to that, what happens? They begin to wilt, they become susceptible to disease, and they falter or die or die. And so if you extend that to us as people, knowing the burden and the stressors that Black women are subjected to every day, there is plenty of literature to that. And I think I actually will do a part 2, because I'm so tired of people saying, well, where's the data? You know, where's the this, where's the that? There's plenty of data to it, in terms of the epigenetic impacts of racism and sexism, all of these versions of discrimination, intersectional discrimination and oppression that Black women uniquely face, and how it impacts us from a health perspective. If you're not whole, if you're not healthy, all of those things that you want to do, the life you want to live, the thriving, the loving, the community, the exploring, none of that is possible if you're unhealthy in mind, body, and spirit. Let's just keep it 100. None of that is possible if you're not healthy in mind, body, and spirit. I can't tell you how many times I've come into work in the lab, and somebody's come in with issues, and then, you know, there's a Black woman that comes in. I'm always hyper sensitive when I'm dealing with, you know, stuff related to Black women in the workplace, coming through our systems, our tests and all of that, and results of tests. I'm always interested to see what's the backstory. A lot of these women were working, collapsed, or something else happened. They had chest pains, only to find out giving from a place of emptiness. This has been a recurring theme for us, and it's time to break that cycle. Many of us carry the generational trauma of seeing these archetypes in operation in our own families, and seeing the sad results, the outcomes of this. This is not germane just to Black women here in the diaspora. There's a version of these archetypes in existence on the continent, specifically my part of the continent, Nigeria. I have family there, and I've seen what that looks like on that instance. I've read numerous books that speak to the experience of African women, Nigerian women. There was one book that radicalized me as a high schooler way back when, and it was called ironically, it was called The Joys of Motherhood. And looking back now, the archetype of the lead character in that book, unfortunately, she was the Sisterella archetype. And without spoiling the end for those of you who haven't read the book, it was a sad, sad ending. And so I'm going to leave it there. This is, again, something that we all need to address when it comes to self-care, and self-care as Black women, and practicing decolonized self-care. Again, I did mention that I am a women's self-care and health coach for Black women over 40. And I use self-care as a modality of helping Black women liberate themselves from all of these archetypes. We have all been one of these archetypes at some point in our lives. And when you know better, you do better. And that is my goal. That is my soapbox, is liberating Black women from these archetypes. Because it's killing us. And it's time to be honest about it, and it's time to do the necessary work to liberate yourself from that. You'll live better, you'll be able to do better. All the things that you dream of doing, for the most part, are achievable. But if you're unhealthy in mind, body, and spirit, if you're using maladaptive strategies to navigate America and all of its BS, guess what? You're just going to be another statistic. And I think it's time. I think after last November, I think we have gotten to a place where we can opt out of this nonsense and liberate ourselves. Hustle culture is tied to Sisterella. And she, that sad girl, that sad sis, is just hustling her life away. And hustle culture, again, all of these are rooted in racism. They're all rooted in racism. They're all rooted in chattel slavery. And I think I'm going to go give do a part 2, because I want to give a little more context to that in terms of how these archetypes are related to chattel slavery. They have their origins in slavery, and the trauma of going through that as a people, especially as women. I always am hyper aware of the fact that whenever there's economic instability, wherever there's social, political instability, chaos, things of that nature, we as women globally understand that the ones who are the most vulnerable will always be women, children, the elderly, the disabled, any group that's othered or marginalized. They will always bear the brunt. And for us, unfortunately, as Black women, we have so many points of intersectionality that we're disproportionately affected by this. And so that's why I felt it was so important to talk and speak on these archetypes, so that we can begin to rethink not just our self-care, but the way we are moving in society, in this world, what kind of social contracts we have unconsciously made with society. It's time for liberation. It's time to get off the altar of other people's expectations. It's time to live your life. So having said that, I'm going to leave it here and encourage you to, again, follow the channel. I appreciate you being here. Hit the notification button and stay tuned for more resources coming your way. Again, between the next 1 to 2 days, I will be adding in the description here, I will be adding the links for resources for that archetype worksheet, so you can help figure out which one you are, so you know where you need to start doing work. You'll also be able to, there's a link in my bio on this page too, where if you need to book an intensive consultation, I'm available for that as well. It's a lot of work. It's very intensive. Sometimes I know people don't want to go through a prolonged process, or sometimes they feel like when they need someone to help them in a certain aspect of their journey, that's when they access that resource. So that's why I typically do intensive consultations, typically under 45 minutes, because I expect you to come in and get ready to work. So that's how that operates. So having said that, once again, my name is Tonye Barango, and I am the Self-Care Maven here. And I help Black women get on their self-care journey and liberate themselves from the altar of other people's expectations. Till next time, thank you for joining me here. Bye.